Hi, I'm Bruce from Fast Bikes and I'm here with Paul and Stuart from Black and White Bikes, who are going to be showing us how to service our brakes. So I'm not one to get my hands dirty, but these guys are. Paul, can you give me a bit of an idea of what we're going to be doing today?
Yeah, sure. We're going to have a look at this CBR 600RR. We're going to service the front brake calipers, overhaul them, just check them over, clean them up, make sure they're working properly, and then replace the fluid.
Fantastic.
So here's the tools that we're going to use for our brake servicing. Obviously the standard stuff, ratchet, spanners, but also torque wrenches. More specialist jobs, we've got a brake piston tool here and a piston pushing back tool, syringes for sucking out fluid out of reservoirs, old toothbrush. Can't go anywhere without an old toothbrush. This is our bottle for catching old brake fluid. Then the other products, we've got brake cleaner, very important, and red rubber grease. That little kit, that'll service your brakes. We're just going to check, first of all, before we do anything, that we've got a good run on the wheel. So spin the wheel around, make sure nothing is binding. We don't need to replace discs or have a look for any problems initially. So once we know that the wheel spins cleanly, then it's time to take the caliper off. Before we take the caliper off, we just loosen the retaining pins, the pad retaining pins. And on these calipers, these can come all the way out, and we can actually remove the pads with the caliper still mounted on the bike, which will just make it easier to get the caliper off with the pads out. So, retaining pin out, and another retaining pin coming out. There's the spring plate, which will jump out as soon as that comes. So the spring plate comes off, and now the pads will slide out, hopefully. They'll be tight. 1 and 2 coming out. And now we can undo the caliper off the fork leg. Caliper mounting bolts off, and now the caliper should slide off easily enough. Just support that with a bungee strap so there's no weight on the brake line. So now we're going to scrub away with brake cleaner, an old toothbrush, get as much muck out of the piston area as possible. And then we're looking to rotate at some point. Once we've got them clean-ish, we'll rotate the pistons so that we can get to the muck that's on the backside that is more difficult where the toothbrush doesn't reach. So a bit of a wipe down, and we're using this little piston tool which grasps the inside of the piston. Now that one looks a little bit stiff, but it's rotated round. And so that's going to bring, we're not pulling out, we're just rotating the piston around and give it a bit of a scrub. Now this can take a few minutes to do all 4 pistons. That one span around quite nicely, so there's obviously no problems there. And we're going to check the way that the pistons come out when we apply the brake lever. So a bit more of a wipe down. So that's all rotated round. That's the last one spun. That one's stiff as well. That's having a job gripping that. So there could be an issue on that one because that's quite stiff, but we might, on this one, pop a bit of a chunk of wood in between the 2 bigger pistons. Will that sit in there? Yeah. So if I hold that in there, and then so that's going to hold those 2 pistons out, and now bring those 2 in. But they've moved quite freely now. We don't want to go too far, but now with those 4 pistons a bit more revealed, we can do a bit more of a wipe round. We've been very careful not to allow the pistons all the way out. Obviously, we don't want that. That introduces us to a world of pain. But they're out enough for us to just do a full inspection. Once they're all clean off, we can apply some grease. So we've got a red rubber grease here. So we're going to wipe it onto the piston and wipe it round, move the piston around with the same piston tool if we can, if we have to, and then push those pistons back. So this will take a bit of time, so we're just rotating each piston So once that's all cleaned off and all re-greased, we can just push those pistons back. If you're lucky, you can do this with your finger and thumbs if you're strong enough, but make life easy with a tool that just pushes them back. You don't need an excess of grease lying around, so wipe the excess off. As long as those seals are greased, that's all we need. We don't need loads of grease lying around the caliper. If it managed to find its way onto a pad, that would be bad news, so give a little rough wipe down. You can go to town on the outside as much as you like, so we just need to clean off the components that we took out. We'll let it hang back on a bungee cord, and we need to find the other components. You want to clean that spring plate off. So we're going to clean these retaining pins off with put them in a drill, Scotch-Brite pad. Check that they run true, they're not bent, corroded. That's our pins, nice and clean. Got all the rubbish of those, nice and shiny. So the pads, pins and spring plate all ready to go back together. We're going to reassemble the caliper, put the pads and put the pads in first, and then it's a bit of a juggling job, this. Sometimes need 3 hands, but you've got to put the retaining pins in while pressing down, holding the pads in place. The spring plate does an important job. It does more than one job. It holds the pads apart. It puts pressure on the pads to make sure they don't rattle around too much. And there is an arrow and an up sign to make sure you put them in the right way round. So finger tight on the retaining pins initially. That's the caliper pretty much rebuilt. And that can now be, with the pads all the way apart, that should be a doddle to just slide onto the disc, lined up and mounting bolts popped in. And then of course we finish the job off by torquing them up. Bolts are clean, there's no copper slip on the bolts or anything like that. If it was a road bike, we'd probably put Loctite on, a little dab of Loctite to make sure, but race bikes, track bikes, these calipers are on and off more often than anything else, so we don't put any Loctite on them, we just make sure we check them all the time. And then the final job would be to pump the brake lever on the master cylinder just to bring the pads back into contact with the disc. Once we get pressure back on the bar, check the wheel spinning all right. So we're all good. So that is our calipers all sorted. So the next job will be to bleed the brakes out. We're undoing the 2 bolts on the cap. Lift the cap off first of all, make sure there's no muck in there. Then there's a plastic cap in there, then the rubber seal comes off. That's only an indicator, that's to make life easy to see where your brake fluid is in the window. And those can now be put to one side on a clean cloth. We're going to need to clean those off because we're changing the fluid over to a new fluid. We're changing site specification. We're going to syringe out that old fluid. This is a more road-based fluid and we're going to be changing it for a race spec fluid. So just suck it up, squirt it in the waste pot until that master cylinder is empty. So we're just going to put the race product in now, but we will be obviously bleeding it through comprehensively, so it'll come out of both calipers and go all the way through. Screwdriver, crack it open and now just bleed the fluid through. Now even though it's a one-way valve, we still operate it the old manual way as well, just a bit of both really. Keep your eye on the reservoir. We're probably looking to put 3 or 4 master cylinder reservoirs worth of fluid through to make sure that it's all clean and gone through, and then we've got to do the other side as well. So we're going to take this off, move everything around to the other side. So we're just going to repeat pretty much what we did that side. hang on a second, let's top that up. Okay, just lock it off for a minute. If you have a real good look down there, you can see the piston moving, and we're just making sure that there's not any air bubble trying to creep back up there or anything like that. We've actually got a really good feel on this lever now. For a stock setup, that's not bad at all. And then tidy up. Then all we've got to do is make sure there's enough fluid in the reservoir up top, and then put the clean cap and seals in place. What you've got to be careful with is not putting so much in there that you've actually filled it brim full. They're the bits that are going back inside. Make sure they're nice and clean. The non-rubber bits you can wipe down with a bit of brake cleaner. So just clean those off and then it can be put back together. As you can see, we go through brake cleaner at quite an alarming rate around here. So yeah, the name is synonymous with brakes, but we use it all the way through the bike. Remember the order that it came in as well. So we want to make sure that everything goes together the same way, the way it came out. Push that down, make sure it seals nicely all around the rubber. And then, is there a right way around? That sits nicely, it's not going anywhere, so now it can be screwed down. Don't over tighten these, they don't need to be mad. They can easily get rounded off and then we have to drill them out. We'll give it a pump now, and under pressure, just go around checking there's no fluid coming out from anywhere. We're just putting a lot of pressure through there, that is a lot, and then just check it all round. And there's no fluid oozing out from anywhere else. And we've got a guideline halfway up the window of fluid, so job done. Happy with that. All new fluid in the brakes.
So there we have it. So there's a lot that goes into servicing your brakes, as these guys have just shown us. It's a big old job, especially if you do it properly. What I would say is, if you don't feel competent or confident in yourself, don't get stuck in, because you really don't want to mess around with your brakes. But if you follow this simple procedure, step by step, then I'm sure you'll have a much better grasp of how you can do it. If you're struggling, get in touch with Black and White Bikes, and I'm sure they'll help you out a bit more.